Hello and welcome to 360 Gamercast, episode 163, a Sega special part 2, where we'll be talking about the Sega Saturn and the Sega Dreamcast. I'm your host, Mark Webb, Gamertag, Pearson ID, Steam ID, Webby360G, and joining me today is...
I can't think of anything funny, so I'll just say Nick Fights.
And Sensei Switch as per usual.
Yahoo! I did try to get Stunty on, but he said to me that he didn't really have anything to do with the two systems.
That's what I figured.
So he wasn't really that bothered. So I was like, right, that's cool. And so the show,
PlayStation fanboy.
Yeah, well, he is, isn't he? But anyways, yeah, so the show normally comes out on a Tuesday, but we are recording on a Tuesday, so it's probably going to be out Wednesday the 3rd. Just because it's been a bank holiday weekend and we've all been very busy with lives and things like that. So this is the earliest that we could record. But it's all okay. We will survive. So, yeah. So, going to talk about the Sega Saturn first, because obviously that came out before the Dreamcast, but then I'm sure we'll mix and match between the two anyway. So, just a little bit about the Saturn. Me personally, I'd never had one at launch, never had one as a kid. My only experience with a Saturn was one of my school friends had one, and I played his a couple of times, Virtua Fighter, and I think it might have been Panzer Dragoon or Crazy. Was Crazy Taxi on the Saturn? I'm thinking of Dreamcast for Crazy Taxi.
Yes, on the Dreamcast.
Yeah. So my experience was very limited on the Saturn. So yeah, I didn't really play it because when the PS1 came out, I was all over the PS1 to be honest. But a little bit of history on the Sega Saturn before we go into everyone else on the show. Release date in Japan was November the 22nd, 1994, and North America May the 11th, 95, and Europe July the 8th, 1995. Quite an interesting design, which I'm going to go into very quickly now. The Saturn has 2 CPUs, which is very strange for any system. I mean, even high-end PCs only have, one CPU, another have a lot of cores, but, one CPU. And I watched a video on this ages ago, so I'm just going off memory here. And one of the reasons why I had two CPUs was because the initial design only had 1 CPU, but they were worried about the lack of power it would have compared to the PlayStation, so they very quickly changed the design of the Sega Saturn.
It was also mainly maybe because PlayStation was really pushing 3D, and Saturn wasn't really designed around 3D at all. It was supposed to be a 2D powerhouse, which it kind of is. Yeah. So they thought, we can't redesign the whole thing. Let's just bolt another one on and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Well, it also had the little cartridge slot at the back, which you could use for various things, especially like certain games boosting the power of the system.
Yeah, it's a RAM expansion. Like the N64 had the expansion pack, and also you could put memory card in it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, because what happened was, with the design changes for the Sega Saturn, there was a lot of big disagreements between Sega of Japan and Sega North America. So Sega North America didn't want the Saturn to have the changes with the extra CPU and all that, but Sega Japan obviously overrode them. And and so there was a lot of bad blood between the two different units in the company, which is quite interesting, to be quite honest with you. I'm just trying to find, because I was so according to Sega of America, President Tom Kalinske, Sega of America fought against the architecture of Saturn for quite some time. they were instead seeking an alternative graphics chip for the Saturn by doing a deal with Silicon Graphics, but Sega of Japan rejected the proposal. Silicon Graphics subsequently collaborated with Nintendo on the Nintendo 64. So and the problem with the Saturn was because of the confusing architecture of it with the dual C CPUs, it made it very difficult for developers to make games for it, which is one of the reasons why it declined so quickly. Because of you found that the ports, say from the PlayStation versions of games, were just pretty shitty on the Saturn, unfortunately. It is an interesting system though, because I've actually got one now, and I got the action replay cartridge slot that goes in the back, and it basically does two things. It expands the RAM, and it also allows you to play foreign games and burnt CDs as well.
Yeah, but you have to hack it, don't you? That's called the basically pseudo Saturn hack. You basically hack the cartridge. I've got like several.
Yeah,
which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So that is cool because
15, nearly 20 years for them to actually be able to hack the Saturn, because it was one of the hardest consoles to hack and pirate.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Which is the exact opposite of Dreamcast.
Yeah, but I think one of the problems with the Saturn is now the games are so expensive to get, especially like Panzer Dragoon is notoriously like 600 quid plus.
Or you can buy it from like a tenner from Etsy on Pirate. which is what I did, and which I'm happy to do, because I don't care. Giving £600 to someone on eBay is not helping the game industry at all, is it? Whereas if I want to play the game, then I spend the £10 and basically get the burnt games, and they put them on disc and put the thing covers on the disc and print a case and things like that. So I'm happy. I'm more than happy with that. I mean, I was similar to you, Robbie. I didn't get a Saturn until years later as well. But I mean, just to, I won't say correct you, but you say like, oh, all the ports or whatever, the PlayStation were the better. That's not technically true. It depends on the game.
Oh yeah, definitely.
All the 2D fighting games, pretty much everything was better on Saturn.
The SNK ones especially as well.
Okay.
Yeah, the SNKs, the Street Fighter games, all the X-Men versus Street. I mean, the biggest, not to jump too much into games, but X-Men versus Street Fighter on Saturn was basically like a tag tournament game where you could swap in and out two characters. And on the PlayStation, it just had one-on-one. They couldn't even do that. And it ran obviously a lot slower as well.
Yeah, that was one of the first games I remember needing the cartridge.
Yeah, you need that. And then you have the Street Fighter Alpha games, or Zero as they call them in Japan, because I think Street Fighter 03 never came out over here on the Saturn, but it did like in Japan. I mean, we say the Saturn was a bit of a flop, but it done really well in Japan, actually, really well. I think there was over 1,000 games made for it.
Darkstalkers,
wow.
Yeah, like what Webby said, because there was a lot of friction between Sega Japan and Sega of America, they just like had so much grief. They didn't even want to release games in America and outside Japan. They were like, nah, we don't want to release that game. And like I said, I mean, this was going on for a while between like through the Mega Drive. Like they were always arguing over, like they don't want to do the 32X, but when they did, they wanted to use this company and this CD company, and they were just basically arguing for a good 10 years, which kind of explains why Sega just went into meltdown.
Yeah.
I mean, the biggest one with the Saturn, which, like you said, Webby, where they released it in America, was actually they announced and released it on the day on E3. They actually did the whole.
Right. Yeah.
It's released now. It's in the shops shops, but only certain shops, and they had hardly any stock available. And not only that, a lot of company, later it turns out that Sega of America just went over to Japan and just took like the beta versions of the game and just printed them. So that's why you had like Daytona USA, Virtua Fighter 2, and the originals. Everyone know they were just slow and buggy as hell, and things like that, because they weren't ready. They were like 2 or 3 months early where they originally stated, and because I suppose Sega of America thought that would be great to just do a stealth release. So a lot of those games, like I say, Daytona, Virtua Fighter, I think there's another couple as well, they actually got like special editions. Like Virtua Fighter got a remix edition, and then Daytona got, I think it was Ultimate Championship edition or something, where the game worked, because obviously you couldn't patch them back then, could you?
No. Oh, that's interesting. As I say, because I don't have a lot of experience with the Saturn, so I can really only go on what I've read. I mean, it's a console that's always fascinated me, which is why I picked one up. But I just found the games are so expensive. I've always I just have, like, when I was playing it a lot, I just downloaded the games and ripped them to CD. Just because the games are so expensive. Let me just read a little bit off the wiki. It says here, the Saturn has dual CPU architecture and 8 processors. The development of the Saturn began in 1992, the same year as Sega's groundbreaking 3D Model 1 arcade hardware. The Saturn was designed around a new CPU from the Japanese electronics company Hitachi, and Sega added another video display processor in early 1994 to better compete with Sony's PlayStation. The Saturn was initially successful in Japan, but failed to sell in large numbers in the US, where it was hindered by a surprise May 95 launch, which is what you just mentioned, 4 months before its scheduled release. After the debut of the 64 in 96, the Saturn rapidly lost market share in the US, where it was discontinued in 1998, having sold 9.26 million units worldwide. The Saturn is considered a commercial failure. The cancellation of Sonic Extreme, planned as the first 3D entry in Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog series, is considered a factor in its performance. The Saturn was succeeded in 98 by the Dreamcast. Yeah, so that's quite interesting, isn't it? I think. Yeah, I know it had quite an interesting development. So it says here, in 93, Sega restructured its internal studios in preparation for the Saturn's launch to ensure high quality 3D games. But what's quite funny, I know we mentioned the 32X in the last episode, but the 32X add-on for the Mega Drive came out the same year as the Sega Saturn, which was quite interesting as well.
Yeah. It's just mental, and there was a lot of things that happened, like I say, between there. Whereas the guy, I think his name, like the head of Sega of America, basically said, like a year and a half before the Dreamcast came out, Saturn's dead. I wouldn't even bother with your Saturn Dreamcast. The next console we're making, the Dreamcast, I'd just wait for that. And I was like, that's not really good. This console's been out, what, a year and a half, and he's saying it's dead, don't bother with it. And obviously Sega Japan weren't happy, and all the people who bought the console weren't happy either, were they?
No.
And also, I think that one of the, probably the biggest factor was Saturn was $100 more than the PS1 also.
Yeah.
Because that was the E3, which I think is still one of the most hilarious, like, Sony E3 things. After Saturn did their stealth release, it's available now, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Take that, Sony and Nintendo. PlayStation, the guy who was in charge of PlayStation just walked up on stage and just said $299 and just sat back down. And that's all he did. Which I thought was funny because, like I said, PlayStation was £100 cheaper than the Saturn. And, usually that helps quite a lot. I mean, PlayStation did that quite. Like years later, they announced that they were going to be $100 cheaper than the Xbox One, didn't they?
Yeah.
So price is kind of everything, and and also it doesn't help when. Can you imagine the head of Xbox, Phil Spencer, coming out? Yeah, Xbox One is dead. You might as well just wait for the next one.
Oh no, it's like, ridiculous. What? Yeah, I mean, I look back to that time in my life because I had a Mega Drive. I was a Mega Drive boy, big time. But I would just remember. I mean, I was only like 15, and I just remember all the hype being around the PlayStation. I don't really remember any hype towards the Saturn at all. Because like when I went to school, everyone was talking about the PlayStation. Oh my god! And then, as I say, like I only experienced the Saturn because one of my mates had one, and even he was just like, yeah, it's me. I mean, did either of you have one at that time when it came out, or did you pick one up later on in the life cycle? Nick,
I know a friend of mine who bought a Japanese one when it came out.
Oh, okay.
Japanese system. With some like weird games. I think it was like Clockwork Knight, Golden Axe the Duel, a couple of other weird ones that I can't really remember off the top of my head. There was obviously other games I played and definitely remembered, and I think I bought that system off him later because this is another thing where the Japanese and Western consoles were different. The Japanese console was grey, whereas the one we got in the West was black.
Yeah, they had a slightly different and a lot better controller than us as well.
Yeah.
At launch, they replaced it with the Japanese controller, kind of like the Xbox, the OG Xbox launched with the big Duke controller over here, and then they had like the Series S smaller controller, and then eventually
controller S. Yeah, it was kind of like it reminded me a lot of the Saturn controller. I mean, it was pretty good as controllers go. It wasn't fantastic. It still felt a bit plasticky, but it was good.
Yeah, but apparently, a lot of people would say it's probably the best D-pad. It's close to probably the best D-pad ever. I mean, when they're new, obviously, give it 6 months to a year, the D-pad just gets all loose and shaky like the rest of them. Because, like I said, they weren't that well. But they also had, like they had the 6-button controller with the 2 bumpers. So, like I say, for fighting games, that was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the D-pad, it's like I think the D-pad was good in comparison to obviously what PlayStation did, because PlayStation always had those sort of like sections that just poked up through the plastic, like up, down, left, and right. So it never felt like a proper D-pad. It was kind of just like it was a lot harder for fighting games.
The N64 was a complete nightmare, wasn't it? I mean, the whole controller, not just the D-pad.
Yeah, I
didn't get one till years later, Webby, like I said. But to be honest, I didn't even know the Saturn existed until after, like, years later, probably even after I got my Dreamcast. Well, I didn't know. I had no idea.
That's fair enough. Yeah,
like I said, I didn't get loads of magazines. Or I got PlayStation magazines, not much else. And like you said, now everything's on YouTube, social media.
Yeah.
Whereas, mid-90s, everyone didn't have the internet in their house. Definitely no one had smartphones everywhere, to know stuff was coming out. So, like I said, all my mates had PlayStations. One person had an N64, so we ripped the piss out of him. And so everyone just had PlayStation. That's just, you got what your mates had, didn't you? Especially because you could play multiplayer and things like that.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's just the Saturn's just a weird one for me. I mean, as I say, I've got this little bit of history, and it's just had it has got a fraught history. I don't really know what much else we can say on it, to be honest. Had a couple of peripherals, had the RAM thing, the multi-tap, had the 3D pad, which is like just a big circle.
It's kind of a Dreamcast controller when you look at it.
Yeah, but as I say, like, I don't know. We're going to talk about some of the games, mate, because I think we've gone over the hardware stuff as much as we can and the history to a degree. There are some really good documentaries on YouTube about it, which I watched ages ago. I think No Clip might have done a really good one, but yeah, it's just interesting how, as I say, PlayStation came in and just fucking destroyed everyone then, and Sega took the brunt of it.
Well, yeah, obviously, I will say with that, when we get to obviously the follow-up system, I know a lot of people that really enjoyed it when they played it, but everyone I knew was pretty much like, I'm just holding off because the PlayStation 2's due out soon.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
And obviously that system, as we've known and we've talked about it played DVDs. So
yeah,
that made it even more of a huge hit for people to get an affordable DVD player as well.
Definitely. To listen to the rest of this week's awesome episode, you need to subscribe to the Patreon. So head on over to patreon.com/360gamercast, where you will get over 2 hours of us on this episode talking about the Sega Saturn and the awesome Sega Dreamcast. And coming up in a few weeks, we will be starting our Nintendo series of episodes. So that is something you do not want to miss. Oh, and also, for those people who have been subscribed to the Patreon for 2 months or more, you will now be entered into a prize draw every single month, which I will live stream on a random number generator, where you will get a game voucher of your choice. So, to subscribe, head on over to patreon.com/360gamercast. It'll be the best £5 you've spent this month.